In a quiet corner of the diner, she sat, hoping to blend into the background and avoid the prying eyes. Her name was Sophia, and at just 17, her life had been molded by hardships no young person should face. Polio had taken her ability to walk as a child, and since then, her wheelchair seemed to define her more than her hopes or gifts. The diner's regulars barely acknowledged her, except to shift awkwardly, as if her presence was a stark reminder of life's harsh unpredictability. Sophia kept her eyes glued to the menu, her fingers nervously tracing its worn edges. The diner's air was thick with the scent of fried eggs and coffee, but to her it felt like a stifling trap. Some patrons acted as if she didn't exist. Others gave her that empty, pitying smile, the kind people offer when they unsure what to say, but want to feel better about themselves. Sophia was used to it, the subtle rejection, the unease her mere existence seemed to stir. That morning, she told herself she'd order breakfast and try to feel ordinary, just once. But deep down, she knew this small town would never let her forget she was different. She took a steadying breath, bracing for another hour of forced smiles and the silent sting of being the girl no one wanted to notice. It began quietly, with a few teenage boys in a nearby booth exchanging smirks and glancing her way. Sophia kept her head down, hoping that ignoring them would make them lose interest and return to their syrup-soaked waffles. But their whispers grew bolder, turning into laughter sharp enough to pierce the clatter of plates and the faint hum of the jukebox. One boy mimicked a stumble as he passed her table on his way to the counter, his friends stifling giggles behind their hands. The sound rippled through the diner like a cruel wave, and the silence that followed was almost worse. No one stepped in to stop it. Sophia sat motionless, her face burning as if she were on display in some heartless spectacle. Even the cook, visible through the kitchen window, busied himself with flipping pancakes, pretending not to notice. The boys returned to their booth, still chuckling, their shoulders shaking with the thrill of those who'd never learned the weight of cruelty. The other diners kept their eyes on their plates, stirring their coffee, quietly grateful the mockery wasn't aimed at them. Sophia's hands trembled in her lap as she tried to dismiss the tears welling in her eyes as nothing more than a speck of dust. She was no stranger to casual malice, but this time it cut deeper, leaving a wound she feared might never heal. Rebecca, the waitress, had worked at the diner for nearly a decade. She prided herself on handling anything: busy lunch rushes, grumpy regulars, even the occasional kitchen disaster. But watching the boys taunt Sophia, she felt her resolve fray. She set the coffee pot down with shaking hands, torn between her instinct to intervene and the need to stay professional. The manager, a weary man with bills and a family to support, had warned her, "Don't upset the local kids. Their parents' money keeps this place running during lean times." Rebecca hated her hesitation. She knew she should speak up, say something to shield the girl sitting alone with her pain. But the fear of losing her job was real, and she swallowed the words that burned in her throat. She tried to catch Sophia's eye, hoping to offer a silent apology, but Sophia never looked up. Instead, the girl's shoulders seemed to collapse inward, as if she were trying to vanish entirely. Rebecca wiped her hands on her apron and turned away, her heart heavy with guilt. It was easier to pretend she hadn't seen anything, easier to convince herself she had no choice. But deep down, she knew she'd failed a basic test of humanity, and that failure would linger long after the breakfast crowd left. Emboldened by the lack of repercussions, the boys grew brasher. One of them called out across the diner, his voice laced with mock kindness, "Hey, need a hand getting around? We could give you a shove." His friends erupted in laughter, reveling in their act. The cruel chorus drew glances, but no one moved to intervene. Sophia's breath hitched. She'd never felt so vulnerable, so utterly powerless. Her fingers gripped the armrests of her wheelchair, her knuckles whitening. All she'd wanted was a simple breakfast, a fleeting taste of normalcy. Instead, she'd become a target. As the laughter swelled, so did her shame. She felt every pair of eyes on her, some sympathetic, others quickly looking away in discomfort. A woman near the counter murmured, "Someone ought to do something," but stayed seated. The manager stayed out of sight in the back. The cook kept flipping eggs, and Rebecca busied herself with a sugar dispenser that was already full. Sophia's chest ached with the effort of holding back tears. It was as if the world had agreed her dignity was a fair price to pay to avoid an awkward confrontation. In that moment, she realized cruelty thrived not just in the actions of the cruel, but in the silence of those who stood by and did nothing. Sophia couldn't recall when the first tear escaped. Maybe it was when the boys mocked the creak of her wheelchair, or when their entire booth burst into laughter at her expense. She sat there, trembling, her hands clenched in her lap, her shoulders shaking as she fought the sobs rising in her throat. The humiliation was overwhelming, a heavy fog she couldn't escape. Every second stretched into eternity. Every laugh felt like another scar she had to bear in silence. She bit her lip until it stung, determined not to let them hear her cry. Around her, the diner carried on as if nothing was amiss. Plates clinked, forks scraped, coffee poured steadily into cups. But to Sophia, it was all drowned out by the roar in her ears, the frantic pounding of her heart. She pressed a shaking hand to her cheek, wiping away tears as fast as they fell. All she wanted was to vanish, to slip out the door unnoticed, but her wheelchair made that impossible. She was trapped, pinned by her own vulnerability, while strangers decided whether she was worth defending. She'd never felt so isolated. As Sophia struggled to hold herself together, her phone buzzed softly on the table. She nearly ignored it, afraid her trembling hands would fumble it. But some small spark of desperation made her reach for it. She wiped her eyes and glanced at the screen, a number she didn't recognize. For a moment, she feared it was another cruel prank. She'd had those before. But something urged her to answer. Her voice was barely a whisper as she said, "Hello?" A low, gravelly voice came through, one she couldn't place. "Hold on, little sister," it said, rough but kind. "We're coming." The line went dead before she could respond. She stared at the phone, confusion mixing with fear. Who was we? What did they mean? A fresh wave of dread surged through her. She glanced up, expecting the boys to be watching her again, but they were caught up in their own amusement. She had no idea that call was the first thread in a chain of events that would alter her life and the town forever. Outside the diner's wide windows, the July sun beat down on the cracked asphalt. A heat haze danced over the empty parking lot, with only a stray cat sniffing near the garbage cans. But gradually, something changed. A pair of chrome headlights gleamed at the end of the street, accompanied by the deep growl of an engine. Then another and another. Rebecca, wiping down a booth by the window, squinted into the light. At first, She thought it was just a few bikers passing through, a common sight in summer, but the engines didn't fade. They turned into the lot, lining up with military precision. Sophia didn't notice their arrival. She was too focused on steadying her breath, still clutching her phone like a lifeline. But the diner grew quieter, an uneasy hush settling over the room as people sensed something was cunning. One of the boys who'd been laughing glanced outside, his smirk faltering into uncertainty. The engines kept coming, filling the lot with a rumbling chorus that shook the diner's windows. By the time the last bike stopped, over 20 motorcycles stood in formation, chrome and leather gleaming like a wall of silent judgment. The engines didn't stop immediately. They idled, their growl vibrating through the air like an approaching storm. It was a sound that hit you in the chest, in your bones, in the pit of your stomach. Even the cook paused, his spatula hovering midair. No one spoke. The boys who'd mocked Sophia shifted uncomfortably, their laughter replaced by nervous tension. The town was used to the occasional biker rolling through, but this was different, deliberate, intentional. Sophia finally looked up, startled by the rattling glass. She blinked through her tears, her gaze moving past Rebecca's stunned expression to the rows of motorcycles outside. For a moment, she couldn't process what she was seeing. It seemed impossible that this had anything to do with her. She gripped her phone tighter, the memory of that gruff voice, "We're coming," echoing in her mind. And in that instant, something stirred within her, not quite hope, but a sense that she might not be as alone as she'd thought. One by one, the bikers dismounted, moving with a calm confidence that was more intimidating than any show of force. Sunlight flashed off their helmets as they removed them, revealing weathered faces and serious eyes. Each wore a black leather vest with a patch that sent a shiver through the town, Hell S. Angels. The name carried a mythic weight, a blend of fear and intrigue. They stood in a loose line, scanning the diner with cool, deliberate scrutiny. Inside, the air grew heavy, as if the room itself were holding its breath. The boys' bravado crumbled. They exchanged anxious glances, their shoulders hunching as if to shield themselves from the biker's gaze. Rebecca's heart pounded, wondering if she should lock the door, though she knew it was too late. Sophia's breath caught. For a moment, she felt a flicker of fear, unsure what this meant or why they were here. But then one biker nodded to her through the window, his expression neither pitying nor harsh, just respectful, as if he knew exactly why he was there. When the door opened, the bell above it jingled cheerily, a jarring contrast to the tense silence. The bikers filed in, their boots heavy on the faded linoleum. The small diner felt even smaller, their presence swallowing the space. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, forks froze, and the jukebox playing an old Merle Haggard song went silent as the cook pulled the plug. The boys who tormented Sophia sank lower in their booth, avoiding the entrance. The lead biker, a tall man with a gray braided beard and a face like weathered stone, surveyed the room with a slow, deliberate gaze. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone held everyone in place. His eyes settled on Sophia's table, and in that moment, something passed between them, a quiet recognition that she had been seen. For Sophia, it was like breathing again after being underwater. The cruel laughter had stopped. The humiliation had paused. And though she didn't fully understand why these men were here, she felt, for the first time that morning, that she wasn't alone. The tall man with the braided beard stepped forward, stopping just in front of Sophia's table. He didn't loom over her menacingly. He simply stood with a calm authority that commanded the room. His vest bore the Hell's Angels patch, and below it the name Bishop was stitched in bold letters. He looked at Sophia, and for a moment, the boys, the staring customers, the pitying glances, they all vanished. He nodded slightly, a gesture both respectful and timeless. "Miss," he said, his voice low and steady, "we heard you were having a rough time." He didn't explain how or why he knew. He didn't need to. His tone carried a certainty that this was no accident. He was here for her. Behind him, the other bikers stood like a silent wall, their presence a promise that her days of facing cruelty alone were done. The room held its breath. Even Rebecca, gripping the counter, felt tears prick her eyes. She'd never seen anyone stand up for Sophia like this, with such unwavering resolve. The boys who jeered all morning now looked like they wished the floor would swallow them. Their leader, a lanky kid named Dylan, whose father owned the town's biggest lumber yard, tried to muster his earlier smirk, but it faltered. His friends stared at their empty plates, suddenly engrossed in stray crumbs. Bishop's gaze drifted toward them, slow and deliberate. It wasn't an angry look, but something deeper, a look from someone who'd seen cowardice in all its forms and recognized it instantly. Dylan's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. He tried to laugh, but the sound died in his mouth. No one backed him up this time. The diners felt it too a moment where cruelty met something unyielding and retreated. Even the cook, peering through the kitchen window, felt a quiet satisfaction. These boys had always acted untouchable, but here, in front of the girl they'd mocked and the men who'd come for her, they were just scared kids who'd mistaken cruelty for power. Bishop didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. In a tone as calm as it was piercing, he asked, "Which one of you thought it was okay to treat this young lady like she's beneath you?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. No one spoke. The only sounds were the faint hum of the refrigerator and Sophia's heartbeat pounding in her ears. It was a question that demanded more than an answer. It demanded truth. Dylan's face paled. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His friends squirmed, their eyes darting. Some older customers, who'd known Sophia since she was a child, couldn't meet Bishop's gaze either. Their silence, their failure to act, had allowed this cruelty to grow. Rebecca felt a lump in her throat. She wiped her hands on her apron, wishing she'd been braver. Bishop stood still, waiting like a judge. And in that long, heavy pause, it was clear the bikers weren't here to start trouble. They were here to hold a mirror to the town's face. Finally, Bishop spoke again, his voice steady but resonant with a quiet power. "Respect," he said, "isn't something you give only to people who look like you or live like you. It's a right everyone's born with. And when you take it from someone, you're the one who loses." His words landed like stones, shattering the boy's fragile arrogance, but he didn't gloat or threaten. He spoke truth as if it were gospel. Sophia felt something loosen in her chest, a raw place touched by a kindness she'd never known. Tears came again, but not from shame. Around the diner, others looked down, their faces flushed with a shame they hadn't expected to feel. This wasn't just about the boys. It was about everyone who'd let a young girl be humiliated because silence was easier. The bikers had come to deliver more than protection. They'd come to show what dignity looked like and how easily it could be lost when good people stayed quiet. For a long moment, Sophia couldn't speak. She felt small yet vast, as if she were watching her life from outside herself. Then she noticed every eye in the diner was on her, not with pity or scorn, but with something she'd almost forgotten: respect. She took a shaky breath and spoke, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the silence like dawn after a storm. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said, looking at the boys who'd mocked her. "I just wanted to eat breakfast." Her words weren't accusatory, just honest, and that made them all the more powerful. The silence deepened, as if the walls themselves were listening. "You don't have to like me," she went on, "but you don't get to decide I don't belong." Her hands shook, but she held her head high. For the first time, she felt pride in her own voice. The bikers behind Bishop nodded, as if she'd said exactly what they'd come to hear. In that moment, Sophia understood. No roar of engines or show of strength could match the power of a quiet truth spoken by someone who'd endured enough. Rebecca felt something break open inside her. She'd spent the morning frozen by fear, afraid of losing her job, afraid of crossing the wrong people. But watching Sophia speak, she felt her guilt begin to lift. She set down her coffee pot and stepped from behind the counter, her heart racing. Each step toward Sophia's table eased the weight of her earlier silence. When she reached the girl, she placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice raw. "I should have spoken up sooner." Sophia looked up, startled, but her eyes held no blame, only relief, maybe even forgiveness. The diner was silent as Rebecca straightened her apron and faced the boys. Her voice was steady, conversational, but it carried. "You're done here," she said. "Leave and don't come back." Dylan opened his mouth, but no words came. He stood clumsily, his friends following like ghosts. As they passed the line of bikers, Rebecca's hand steadied. For the first time that morning, she knew she'd done right. As the boys slipped out into the glaring sunlight, the bikers relaxed slightly, but the air remained charged, transformed. Bishop turned back to Sophia, his weathered face softening. He knelt beside her wheelchair, meeting her eyes. "You didn't deserve that," he said simply, "and you won't face it alone again." His words were plain, not dramatic, but they felt like a vow. Then, one by one, the bikers stepped forward, offering a hand on her shoulder or a respectful nod, not out of pity, but as if she were one of them, someone whose strength they respected. In their world, respect wasn't about appearances or status, it was about heart. And Sophia had the strongest heart in the room. The diners watched in stunned silence as men once whispered about as dangerous showed more humanity than the town's so-called leaders ever had. For Sophia, the morning's shame faded, replaced by the warmth of being truly seen and valued. Outside, the boys lingered by their truck, their confidence shattered. Dylan's face was flushed, his hands fidgeting. For a moment, he seemed ready to drive off and escape. But he knew running wouldn't erase what he'd done. It would follow him, heavier than his father's wealth could shield. So he swallowed hard, glanced at his friends, and pushed the diner door open just enough to speak. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice faint but audible. "I didn't mean—" He trailed off, knowing it wasn't true. Bishop said nothing. Neither did Rebecca or the bikers. It was Sophia who met his gaze, her eyes clear and steady. "I know you didn't mean to be kind," she said softly, sadly, "but you chose to be cruel." Her words weren't loud, but their weight hit hard. Dylan looked away, unable to hold her gaze. No one spoke to him again. He trudged back to the truck, climbing in like a man burdened by a memory he'd never shake. And that felt like the only apology that mattered. When the boys drove off, the diner remained wrapped in a profound silence. Slowly, the sounds of life returned, the clatter of plates, the creak of a stool as Rebecca sat to catch her breath. But everything felt different. In 1 hour, the town had been forced to confront itself without excuses. They'd seen a girl show more courage than any of them, and strangers in leather vests offer her the dignity no one else had. It was a lesson that would linger in those walls long after the engines faded. That afternoon, the story spread over fences, in phone calls. Some claimed the bikers had gone too far. Others admitted they'd failed to act. But all agreed on one thing. No one would forget the look on Sophia's face when she realized she wasn't alone. In that diner, a line had been drawn. Mocking someone for being different would now come with a cost. And though the Hells Angels would ride away, their example would stay, a reminder that respect, once claimed, could change a place forever. Long after the bikers roared off down Main Street, Sophia stayed by the window, her hands folded in her lap. The shame and fear that had clung to her were gone, replaced by something she hadn't felt in years: pride. She didn't want pity or to be anyone's cause. She just wanted the respect everyone else took for granted. For the first time, she believed she deserved it. Bishop had called her little sister, a simple phrase that made her feel part of something bigger, a family that didn't care about her wheelchair. Rebecca brought her a fresh coffee on the house, her eyes bright. "If you ever need anything," she said softly, "you come to me." Sophia gave a small, grateful smile. She sipped her coffee, watching the last gleam of chrome fade into the summer haze. In her heart, she held a promise. No matter how many tried to make her feel small, she'd remember this day, the day strangers became protectors, the day her voice was enough. As she wheeled toward the door, she knew one thing for certain. She'd never again be the girl no one saw. If this story touched you even half as much as it did me, share your thoughts below. What would you have done in that diner? Is respect something earned or freely given? Subscribe for more stories that remind us not to judge too quickly. And if this resonated with you, give it a thumbs up. It helps our channel grow. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the greatest lessons arrive with the roar of vengeance.